Hey, happy Friday. We're glad you've joined us for part of your morning. The U.S. economy has added 275,000 jobs, and that's a good number. Unemployment has ticked up to 3.9%. Phoenix, listed in the Wall Street Journal job hotspots. Phoenix, Orlando, and Albuquerque. Job growth in the Sun Belt vaults ahead while San Francisco and other powerhouses slow down. Those are some of the headlines. We're going to talk about inflation in a moment. We're going to connect it to the State of the Union in a moment. Again, for me, it's about policy and things in that regard, and I use that phrase a lot. But the story about layoffs remaining low, this is fast forward today's situation looks like a mirror image, according to economists, of what we saw a year or so ago. At the same time, the rate of hiring has dropped significantly. Some economists have begun calling it the Great Stay. On Friday, the Bureau of Labor Statistics is expected to report job growth slower, but steady job growth at 198,000 for February compared to 353 in January. But the solid job growth data combined with an unemployment rate of 3.7 is usually a sign of a healthy labor market, but there's other worrisome trends. The saving grace of the economy of the United States, with the high inflation we've had over the last few years, has been a job market where people could find work and extra work. When you start digging into the details of how many people are working more than one job, that's a big part of this. And so when the president talks about, and I think this is important for you to understand, the job creators are the wealthy people and the wealthy corporations. And he again went after corporations. I want you to hear him talking about corporations in the State of the Union address and going after them about paying their fair share.
Look, I'm a capitalist. If you want to make or can make a million or millions of bucks, that's great. Just pay your fair share in taxes. A fair tax code is how we invest things to make this country great. Healthcare, education, defense, and so much more.
Well, here's the problem I have with this, is you've got someone who spent 4 decades as a senator. I think at least 30. I don't know the number of years he was in the Congress in the 70s. Joe Biden has helped write and rewrite and frame the tax code for 4 decades as a senator. And now he's talking about the unfairness of the tax code. Let's start there. The pitting of rich versus poor, I think, is one of the worst things you can do. I learned a skill from wealthy people. At least in my eyes, they were wealthy. They were much wealthier than I was. My job was to make them money. They owned a business, and businesses have to make money. And so my job was I made a wage so that I made them money. And at the end of the year, when it came time for my review, I went to them and said, I made you a lot of money, and I want a raise. I want another piece of this. And if you're not going to give this to me, I'll go somewhere else and I'll make somebody else money. But always during that time frame, I was always given the impression from everybody I worked for, and I worked for a lot of wealthy people. I worked on an island, many of you have probably heard of it, Sanibel and Captiva Islands off the coast of Fort Myers, Florida. And it's a resort, those are resort islands, and it is a lot like Paradise Valley on an island. Very, very wealthy people, second homes for people, very well off. And everyone I spoke with treated me as if I can do it, you can do it. They gave me advice. They gave me encouragement. They wanted to see me succeed, but they hired me. If it weren't for those wealthy people spending their money, I wouldn't have had a job. If it weren't for wealthy people hiring people and giving them opportunities, you don't have a job. And aside from that, this idea that our government, I don't care which party it is, that our government's job is to separate the rich from the poor and stand in the gap and help one side or the other, is such a false idea. It's such a false idea. The best thing that the government can do for the economy of the United States or a community is to get out of the way, set things up so that people have an easier time doing things. The idea that the tax code is supposed to be fair in the sense that it punishes one side and it gives to the other, the redistribution of wealth idea is old and it's tired and it doesn't work. We all should be cheering a reduced size in our government, which is not something the president talked about. Nobody in this administration, and I will be honest, not many people, even in the Republican Party, are talking about shrinking the size of our government. The president made a ridiculous statement and said that he shrunk the federal deficit. We have a $34 trillion plus deficit. We also know that the deficit is growing at $1 trillion every 100 days. That's the deficit that we as Americans are creating with our government. And all of us collectively, Republicans and Democrats, should be joining hands and saying we have to reduce the size and the spending of our government. Our government is taking too much money. This is local, state, and federal government is taking too much money out of the American economy, over-regulating the rules that the president has put in place with gig workers in California. That affects people making a smaller wage. When you say to people that are using pay apps that instead of 200 transactions or $20,000 in revenue, you're going to get a 1099, we're dropping that down to $600 in a year. That's everybody paying more in taxes. That's them dipping into the American people's pockets. It's creating more paperwork. It's creating more work for people instead of getting out of the way. And that, to me, is the biggest part of this. As that collectively we should be looking at things with a critical eye instead of it always being you against me. There are things that Republicans and Democrats agree on in principle. And if we were to talk that way, if you and I had that discussion outside of our elected officials, we would come to agreements on, yes, this is what our government should and should not be. But as long as the president of the United States has a large number of people standing up and cheering that he's going to go after the rich, as if somehow that's going to benefit the poor, doesn't make any sense. It hasn't worked yet. As a matter of fact, I'm going to ask anybody out there that considers themselves to be working class or poor, how in the world are you being helped? Has somebody helped you out of that situation? Or if you climb out of that situation, did you do it on your own? It's a fair question.
Thanks for watching The Mike Broomhead Show. Tap to watch the first season of Amazing Arizonans, a KTAR News podcast. You can also click the button in the middle to subscribe.